Hey guys, thank you for joining me today. My name is Olivia Odero and I am a licensed professional counselor. And today I wanted to talk about the concept of invalidation and how it affects our lives and how we can come out of it. So, what is invalidation? So, basically, invalidation is when someone's feelings or someone's emotions are not registered as being true or they're not acknowledged as being true. So, for example, we see this in, like, let's say, even, families or children where a child will come crying because probably they've hurt their finger or something like that. And then we're like, don't cry about that. Like, that's not something to cry about, even though that's a little situation. And from an adult's perspective, looking at the child, it looks like a small thing. We are saying it's not something to cry about, but in the child's eyes it's painful. They're crying and they need help. So basically that's what invalidation looks like, when we are not acknowledging someone else's feelings or emotions, where we are kind of downplaying it, that it is nothing to worry about, it is nothing to cry about. So unfortunately, this is the world we live in. We live in a world where we are taught by the society, whether it's through what we watch, through what, how we've been raised. We live in a world where constantly we're being taught how to invalidate each other. And we see this just with an example that I gave. We see this in how, as parents, it's like we live in a very busy world. So it's sometimes, your child is crying, their heart, we're just like, oh, stop crying. Like, why are you crying? That's not something to cry about. Or sometimes, some parents are very angry. They're like, oh, you think that's something to cry about? I'll show you something to cry about. So all these are different ways that, because of just the kind of lifestyles that we live, we end up unconsciously invalidating other people, not just children. We even invalidate ourselves. We invalidate even friends, family. So, for example, sometimes, we are really hurt by something. We're just thinking through something, but it's very hard to process it. Let's say, a breakup, and we're just like, man, I should not cry about this. This is, that person was not worth my time. This is not something to cry about. And we get angry at ourselves, like, why am I even crying about this? Or let's say someone hurt us and we're like, "Ugh, I don't even want to think about this. Like that's, they're not worth my time." Like, as much as we are taught to be strong, like, crying, for some reason, society teaches us that crying is a sign of weakness, or even acknowledging those hard feelings is a sign of weakness. It's kind of like we're giving the other person the upper hand. Actually, what we are learning is invalidation, because the more, in those small circumstances, the more we put down our own emotions, the more we put down our own feelings, where we're like, that's not something to cry about, that's not something to worry about, that's not something to, it's like these emotions are here to show us something. But the more we do that, the more we are self invalidating ourselves, and we train our mind to even invalidate others. So when someone comes with a situation that we're like, oh, that's not something to cry about, that's not something to worry about. But in their books, it is something that they are crying about. It's something that has hurt them. Like, as a counselor, what we are taught, actually we are trained to validate people's feelings, that no matter how small a situation may look like, if the person comes into the room and they say, this is a situation that is big for me, but to me, from my perspective, it doesn't seem like a big situation. As counselors, we are taught that we are to we are to validate that feeling. We are to validate that experience they're having. And this is because we're trying to teach them how to navigate through that. Because what neuroscientists, or even behavior scientists, are finding is that those things that we bury under, where we're like, I'm not going to think about this, I'm not going to worry about this, they still come up, because emotions, feelings, and all those things that we go through, they are usually trying to tell us something about the situation we've gone through. So if you're going through very painful emotions, it's trying to tell you you cared about that person. Like, let's give a story of a breakup, broken up with someone who we really want to forget them. So usually what we've seen on TV or what we're taught is either distract yourself by whatever it is, do something else, or just try your level best to forget about them. Like, don't even cry about it, like they're not worth your tears and all that stuff. But those emotions, they're actually telling us that, number one, we cared about this person. Number two, we're very hurt because we had expectations of this relationship. We had expectations and hopes and desires for this thing to be more than what it has become to be. So those emotions are kind of like traffic lights telling us that, red, red, this is painful. Let's deal with this right now. But if we bury it, it doesn't go away, because emotions have actually been studied and found out to be like actual matter. It's protein matter in our brain, and it just doesn't go away. Matter exists. Emotions are not just like air. I mean, air is even matter. Emotions is not a vacuum where it just comes and it goes. You know, Science is studying these things all the time, and they found that they're actual matter in our brain, in our mind. Whenever we are feeling something, it's a neurochemical being formed, and the more we feel it, the more it forms something even in our mind, in our brain. And we see this in scientific research, which shows the more people are angry and never deal with that, like, it even starts manifesting in physical ailments, just showing that these things, we cannot not deal with them. If we don't deal with them, they come up somehow in a manner that is even like undealable with, if that's a word. So all this is to say is that, as much as we live in a world, in a society where we are constantly being taught to invalidate our own feelings, and then we also kind of join in the same cycle and start teaching our children or teaching others to invalidate themselves. Then we invalidate other people when they come to us with emotions. We kind of just are creating this snowball effect of a lot of undealt with emotions. And what we see in today's world is, as a result of that, we see a lot of depression, a lot of loneliness, a lot of fear of getting into relationships, a lot of just paranoia, a lot of issues with mental health, because we've not taken the time to validate our own selves, and to even validate others, or even to teach our children how to be validated. This all these things, it's like, which one comes first? Is it the egg or the chicken? Should I validate myself first, or should I teach others to validate? Or it's like a cycle. Well, I have good news. That's the good news of what we do as counselors, that there people can get help with just getting a counselor who can teach them how to learn to accept their own emotions and validate whatever is going on within them. But also, the other beautiful thing, not just counseling, is understanding the truth. And especially for those people who know Jesus, like, it's an amazing thing, because God is a God of validation. um God accepts our emotions as they come, even though He does teach us in different ways that our emotions should not lead us. It's not our soul that leads us, but we train our souls. And this can be found in Psalm 131. We wean our souls from depending on, or being instructed by emotions and feelings. So anyway, that's another subject. But God is a God who validates. And why do I say this? Like, we see this in that verse where He says, be angry, but sin not. Like, you can be angry, you can be filled with such, those sad, angry emotions because something has happened that you didn't like. But don't let that emotion lead you into sinning. Sometimes you can get very mad and like, I'm going to hurt that person. They shouldn't have done that to me. So we end up taking an action that is not of God, or is not of truth. And that's what he says, like, you can be angry, you can experience and validate this emotion that you're feeling of anger towards XYZ, but you don't have to act out on it, because that's why he gives us self-control, the spirit of the fruit of self-control that comes from the Holy Spirit. So we can be angry, we can be mad, we can be sad, we can be frustrated, we can be all these things, those emotions, we can allow ourselves to experience them, but we have the power to control our actions, because emotions usually come and say, because you are feeling like this, now do this. We don't have to react from those tough emotions. We can validate them. We can say, okay, this is this because of this, but we don't have to act out of them. We can choose to say, I'm angry, but I still choose to love this person. I still choose to bless them. God says, bless those who persecute you, pray for them. I mean, it's unheard of. It's not a concept that is realistic, but it's what, like, he's telling us to train ourselves, that even though you feel this, train yourself to pray for them, train yourself to live from a heavenly perspective. And the other place where God also shows that he validates what we're feeling, validates what we're going through. When, let's say, sin happens in our lives, usually the reaction is to hide in shame, in guilt. Like we see this with Adam and Eve. After they'd sinned, they wanted to hide. I mean, they did hide. But what did God do? God came and found them. And in finding them, he talked to them. And then we see this even in Isaiah. He says, come, let us reason this out together. Even though your sin is as red as scarlet, I can make it as white as snow. And that just shows that God validates those things. Like, he understands when we are filled with so much shame, so much guilt. He comes to find us. He's not like, you know what, you just go and figure that out, clean up your mess, then come to me. Like, he's a God who comes to find us. Think about even Cain in the Bible. Like, even after he had killed Abel, his brother, it is God who came and found him and said, what is going on? What is this that, what is this sound I hear? Like, what is going on here? So God is a God who validates, number one, how we respond, or even when we react, things that is going on in us, our emotions. And he's able to come into the picture and call us out and say, let's talk about this. Let's discuss this. Let's figure this out. The other thing that shows us that, God is a God who validates is when we're going through, like, fear. Like, when we've come, like, the season of Corona, it came with a lot of fear. All around, we're hearing, like, people are dying. Is this the end of the world? What, all those things. But in the Bible, he keeps on telling us, do not fear. And, it's not just like those parents who are like, do not fear, or I'll show you something to fear. It's not in that way. It's like, this is the reason you're not feel like, I understand you're very afraid. I understand this situation feels like it is unmanageable right now. Like, there is no sunrise on the horizon. It just seems like there's no light. He says, but you don't have to be afraid. Why? Because I am with you. He says in Psalm 23, yea, like David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, where things just seem so dark, things don't seem to make sense, I will not fear, because I know that you are with me. And he constantly is reminding us that. He's like, this is the reason you don't have to fear. I understand that you are afraid, but now I'm giving you a new reality as to why you don't have to be afraid. I am with you, and my presence is perfect love. It will cast out all fear. So guys, these are just a few things that show us how, now we can start dealing with those hard emotions. And going back to that thing where I said, where do we start? Because do we start with teaching other people how to validate themselves, or validating ourselves, or all that? Like, it's kind of like, which comes first, an egg or a chicken? So just to make it easy, I've come to understand that the best way to start validating our own selves, or even validating other people's emotions and feelings is by us ourselves understanding that we have been validated already. Because when someone, even on aircrafts, they say before helping someone else, make sure you have your own mask, make sure you are protected, make sure you understand your own self. So it usually has to start with ourselves. It has to start with us understanding our own emotions, our own feelings, our own sadness, our own, whether it's depression, anxiety, loneliness, whatever it is, coming to a place and understanding that this is what I feel and this is what Jesus has done about it. And coming from that place, we can now start even teaching our children, where we're like, oh, you just pricked your hand. Like, of course, in our mind, we're like, that's nothing to cry about. Like, if you understood the bills I have, you would be crying about those bills. We can be like, okay, yeah, you hurt your finger. That must be painful, you know? Yeah, that, you know, because it's the same thing that God does to us. I mean, He's God. He is able to just say, guys, why are you afraid? Like, what's wrong with you? That's nothing to be fearful about. Like, I can show you fear. But He decides to come to our level where He's like, I understand it's not something to fear. I understand it's not something to worry about. I understand it's not something to be angry about. But let us, help me understand your emotions. Help me understand what you're going through. I mean, that's why He became human, so He can understand what we go through as humans. He became flesh so He could understand us. So all that is to say is like, if we want to really start validating ourselves and teaching our children and validating others, it has to start with us understanding how Christ has come to validate us, how Christ deals with our depression, anxiety, loneliness, all those things. And once we understand that, then we're able to do it for our children, do it for others, and we're able to even discern when the world is trying to give us all the wrong ways to deal with these hard emotions. Because the world will be like, here, take medication. The world will be like, oh, here, watch some movies, binge yourself, eat. Because all those are ways of the world to deal with things that are very hard to deal with. But God has a different way for us to deal with these things. So guys, that's the end of today's video. I hope that was enlightening and just encouraging in understanding how to deal with some of these things that can be so hard to deal with emotion-wise. But thank you, and I hope to see you on the next live video. All right, bye.